Newsletters are fundamentally like a nurture channel. You can layer other things on top, right? You can layer on direct response and automations and all these other things, but it's fundamentally a nurture tool. And so the amount of deal flow you can expect from like a cold email campaign or like LinkedIn DM outreach or like all these other options that you have, that might have an ROI time horizon of like 30 to 60 days. A newsletter has a longer ROI time horizon, but it also has more leverage.
Ben, what's going on? How you doing?
Lewis, good to be here. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. There's so much expertise that you have in the world of email. You know, the reason we first really, became friendly and got in touch with each other was one of us connected with the other on LinkedIn, and I just saw like your bio was just all these like crazy stats that you've done in kind of your email career. You're like sent a zillion emails for a zillion companies to make $1 zillion with a zillion different fancy techniques. I was like, well, I have less than a zillion knowledge, so I should meet this guy. How did you get into email? What's kind of your background as a marketer? Let's start there.
100%. I mean, it's kind of, my path has been kind of somewhat unconventional in the sense that I didn't really set out. It's not like I have like a degree in email marketing. I'm not even sure if that's a thing. But like in college, I was studying economics and the plan was to go to law school. And then coming out of undergrad, I just had some job opportunities in marketing departments because during college, my brother and myself, we would actually produce advertisements. Like we'd make media and videos. We'd do some event photography. It was like lots of random media stuff. Sometimes we would produce an ad that somebody wanted to push on like YouTube or whatever. And so because of that work that we did during college, we ended up getting opportunities for work pretty much right after college to work in like marketing departments. And so anyway, long story short, I didn't end up going to law school because I thought, well, these opportunities won't always be here. I can go back to law school anytime. I'll take this random marketing job and just see what I learn. And so I worked just across a bunch of different startups over the next like 6-7 years. So it was like ed tech and news media and e-commerce, like lots of random businesses, usually working at like smaller companies that didn't have a lot of funding and like being kind of the one-man marketing band, doing like lots of random integrations. It's just like you're kind of the everything guy when you work in these small teams. And so, and just learning a lot about like product market fit and like go to market and like all these different niches that I was working in. And then like just over the course of, bouncing around, doing lots of different things, learning a lot, I very much considered myself just to be kind of a marketing generalist. It was like, yeah, I have a pretty good understanding of like a lot of different components and how they fit together, that kind of thing. And then eventually I ended up working for this 8-figure beauty brand called Billups, which how I got hired there is kind of a crazy story in itself because I had like no business. I had no background in beauty. I'd never done e-commerce before. I had like a 20-minute conversation with their CEO and he was like, we're hiring that guy. And I was like, okay, like it was very strange, like unexpected, like way to progress. I didn't think that I'd be working. Like, I didn't think I'd ever sell hair extensions. And then when I was working for them, I was more specialized. So I was exclusively focusing on email, SMS, and like doing a little bit of website CRO. And in the space of like 12 months, managed to 5x their channel revenue. And so for me, that was just like kind of an aha moment where I was like, oh, this is something I like and I'm good at it. And then I just kind of started going down the rabbit hole, just learning everything I could about email marketing, deliverability, like all the automations and the platforms and all that kind of stuff. And then as a component of just having Billups as a case study, just started getting some referrals, like clients on the side where they're like, oh, you used to work at, you helped launch a news company. Here's a news company that's like relaunching or they want some help with XYZ. And so started taking more clients on in the email marketing space. So like one of our first big clients was the New York Sun, and they've been a client with us for about 2 years. So they were like one of our day ones. I think actually even the first 2 clients I signed, we've had up to this point, which is kind of crazy to think about. But it really just started with like a very traditional kind of like beginning of an agency where it's like you have a full-time job, you do some freelancing on the side. And then eventually you have so much freelancing work that it makes sense to leave your full-time job. So that was where I was. I believe it was like November of 2022. I went full-time on the agency. There was actually a brief period of time where I even co-founded another hair extension company. That's a whole nother story. And then that whole thing went sideways. And then, that's a whole nother. I feel like every founder has like 10 bodies in their closet of like, here's some idea that like never worked. And so I definitely have accumulated a few of those over time. And so then I want to say in like July or August of last year in 2023, I went like just full blast on the agency. Like I brought in outside consultants to help me operationalize, started to try to figure out, because, it was just pure referral. It was just like somebody knows a guy who knows me, and then we would get some clients. And so we had accumulated like a client base of maybe 11 or 12 like decently high value clients. And I was like, yeah, this is like a good base to work with. Let me see if I can turn this into something. And then what's happened since then and kind of the evolution of our business. So, our client portfolio then, it was just like random publishers. We would like help with deliverability and growth. We have like a radiology education company, like just lots, because the nature of referrals is just like lots of different types of businesses. And so the original plan for 2024 actually was to go really heavy into e-com, was to say like, hey, I have this strong background in e-com. I have an amazing case study. I have a few other clients in e-com. Like, let's just go, like, let's become the best at e-com, email, and SMS. And then I went to an event and I heard a guy speak who said the best way to get clients for your agency is to have a newsletter. And that was kind of like a little bit of light bulb for me, where I was like, of course. I was like, I know all these things about newsletters. That's super easy for me. I should totally make a newsletter. And then, but then towards the second half of his talk, he was like, here's all these lead generation strategies for your newsletter. And I was like, nah, like I got a way better system than that for growing lists that we developed for these publishers over the course of like 2 years. And so I that's when I created the DTC Dispatch, which still exists. It's an e-commerce newsletter that we have in-house. And so the original goal was like, we'll make this e-com newsletter. We'll get clients from having this newsletter. And then like halfway through, like 2 months into building DTC Dispatch, I was like, wait a minute, the way that I'm growing this newsletter is something that nobody else is doing. Why don't I actually sell the thing I'm doing right now instead of like trying to go down this e-commerce path? And so I just thought, I talked to a few people about it. They were super interested. I was getting like really good, just like kind of grassroots feedback on it. And I thought, you know what, I'll just file a DBA and like throw up a splash page. So that's what Forward Newsletters was at the very beginning. And we've literally like 4x'd our business in 7 months on that offer. And so it was pretty unexpected. Like I thought it would do decent. I didn't think it would do this well, just the sheer amount of interest that we get across B2B and publishers, because it's a very simple productized newsletter offer where we can scale anyone's email list for 75 cents per subscriber with an exact audience match. And so we can get to the details of like how it works, and then like literally to the point where in our Q2 review, we actually decided we don't even want to work with e-commerce brands anymore, because we just want to focus on newsletters and newsletter growth. And so like that's our entire business now. So like Forward is officially like its own entity. Literally right before we started recording this podcast, I signed like 11 legal documents. So like Forward is its own business. Noble Digital is like a holding company for the business. And then we have like plans for expansion into like kind of other variations of this idea, whether that be like software or, media company type businesses and things like that. So that's the plan now, but it was really just about kind of like just following where the trail leads us for the most part. And that's where we are now.
Yeah. Do you, this is such a non sequitur. Do you follow Davis Clark, the guy from Boston who's like super upbeat?
Yes. Well, I don't know if I follow him, but I get his Instagram reels all the time.
You're familiar at least.
Yes.
Man, Davis Clark, he came to mind earlier today for reasons that, let's just say for the people who know, there was a video about his marathon, and something my dog did. It reminded me of the video about him and his marathon. We'll leave it there for the people. So if you want to go on a side quest and explore that connection, but the reason I'm bringing this up, the reason I'm bringing this up is that this is the first one we're recording for Orbit Radio since we kind of rebranded the YouTube channel and did it likewise on our end, a lot of consolidation type activities between the various entities that we own and operate between kind of the group of us founders at our businesses, but. Heavy hitters, as the Davis Clark line here. We've got some heavy hitters for bringing some email expertise in these first few episodes of Orbit Radio. That's my point. You've got serious background of really the full spectrum of email marketing, newsletters, and that's something that maybe you can quickly share. I don't know if I've ever asked you this before, your delineation between the two, or if it doesn't really even matter. Because I've kind of come to the camp that like, who cares? But it's like, not being too intellectualized that like the medium is the message and it really matters. It's like email's a distribution technology for reaching people. and you can conceptualize it however you want. But do you see a difference between email marketing, newsletters? Is one like a subset of the other? There's an inner circle, there's an outer circle. Do you not think the positioning is that important? Because this is something I've debated a lot, is like in terms of like, there's a variety of archetypes, and likewise, you work with a lot of different businesses. You work with people who have no email strategy. You come in and say, I know what you should do. This is going to crush. And you also come on with, very sophisticated publishers who, like you said, just are, drawn to the idea of getting more subscribers at a great price with that exact audience match. And they're like, we've got everything dialed. Just get us more subs. Point is, you have that expertise.
Yeah. I mean, I guess to your point, it has more to do with like the connotation than the definition, I suppose, where it's like, email marketing is kind of an umbrella for a lot of things that can encompass like CRMs and automations and like abandoned cart emails. And like, there's like the cold email outbound guys who just like send direct response offers and like warm up like 12 domains at a time. And like, there's kind of all these different like disciplines within email marketing, where it's like, some guys just crush at like CRM builds and like building amazing CRMs. And some guys are really good at cold email outbound, and some guys are really good at e-commerce. Like they just know the strategies. And so the way that I look at it, at least, is like the connotation of newsletters. It's more oriented around like email campaigns for a business or a media brand that's around some kind of topic, right? And so that's what you see like with media companies, publishers, and like B2B, where you'll be sending like market trends and news or like case studies or tips and tricks. And like just kind of I think the way I always think about newsletters is it's just some kind of sort of like top or middle of funnel value added content that's designed to just keep your audience engaged and provide value to them. That's how I think about it. But at the end of the day, yeah, I mean, email marketing or newsletters could also be considered more broadly to like, if a e-commerce brand sends out a Black Friday promotion, is that a newsletter? Well, yeah, you could say that. But I think most people consider that like a promotional campaign, and they don't think of it as a newsletter. So I think that's the perception, at least.
Yeah, I tend to sometimes go into like these mental side quests of figuring out like how to conceptualize what we do to the market. Because ultimately, what we've operationally got very good at is copywriting, basically, right? Just writing really good quality content for a variety of clients, for a variety of needs on a regular interval, meeting a quality standard and exceeding it. That's our goal. That's kind of our mandate. And that's what we're focusing on getting good at. Whereas, you've kind of really taken the focus on the holistic, like launching things. And I'm always like, what's the segment that really matters? It's like, it's very easy to convince someone, right, who already has a publication and they just want another writer. It's like, look, we're going to write it for you. And if we're not good writers, then fire us, right? That's the wholesale versus someone that's like, you're just convincing them on marketing in general and the value of marketing, the value of producing content. And it's kind of a complicated conversation. And I'm like, what word should I pick to communicate to them that there's some value here if only they would do this thing? And so sometimes I get tripped up on the words. It's like, it doesn't matter, but it does. And so it's really just like almost understanding like the demographic of this person. Like, what are they likely to be? It's like the whole unique mechanism thing. Like, what unique concepts are they like almost like fad? Like, are they most likely to resonate with? So if they're like a Twitter bro who's super into the Beehive thing, then yeah, they think newsletters are great right now. Versus if they're like maybe 40 or 50 and they had email in the 90s or early 2000s, they're like, I thought newsletters were like this thing that my church sent me in 2002. Yep. And like, it's kind of, I don't want one of those clunky church emails. Like I don't know, that just seems old. So that's a whole different battle. It's like the positioning of the value. But the point is like, the more emails you send, the more money you make. Is that an axiom that you would agree with? Yeah.
I mean, broadly speaking, I would say yes. And I think one of the ways that I say this a lot to our clients is like a good way to think about newsletters is like, to your point about it kind of just being another marketing channel. You could think about it the same way you think about a lot of marketing channels, where it's like somebody opens an email and you have like realistically 3 seconds to get their attention. Like a lot of the things that are true in other marketing channels are also true in email. I think if anything, sometimes just under applied concepts in email. But I lost track of the original question where I was going with that. Oh yeah, the reach and frequency. So similar concept from advertising is like advertising is like reach plus frequency to your audience. And then it basically turns into an equation where you say, okay, if this is, let's say it's a B2B business that sells like some kind of high ticket SaaS to a certain type of company, it's not uncommon at all for a business like that to have in their analytics where they're like, yeah, we need typically between like 15 and 25 touch points with a prospect before they'll book a call or take some kind of action on our offers. The same is true for newsletters, where there is a way of looking at it with that, like more is more contacts and more newsletters is more, in the sense that we have seen it play out for clients where if you send once a week, and let's just say it's that like 7 to like 21 touch point range, if you're sending a newsletter once a week, that means a subscriber that you add to your database today has an ROI time horizon of like 2 to 6 months. If the only thing that they're getting is the newsletters. Obviously, if you're factoring in advertising, social media and whatnot, it's less than that. And so in the same way with our clients, it's like, okay, if they send once a week, they usually start landing deals around 3 months into having a newsletter, which is like right on point. If they send 3 times a week, or if they send every day, that ROI time horizon, it gets compressed to like 30 days or 6 weeks or 8 weeks, for example. And we've seen that play out. But the kind of the one caveat to that way of thinking about newsletters is that the content quality does matter. So it's like there are situations where if you switch from weekly to daily and the quality of the content just falls off dramatically, you're actually not building trust with your audience. You're generating a ton of unsubscribes and you're not getting results. It's like terrible. So if somebody is just starting a newsletter, they're like, I think my business should have one. I usually tell them once a week is the right baseline to start with, because you're getting in front of your audience frequently enough that they're not forgetting about you, but you also have enough time to make something decent that your audience is actually going to get value from the thing that you're creating. But if you have like a serious content engine, then I'm like, yeah, daily probably is a good idea, or 2 or 3 times a week is a good idea, because it just means that you're building that trust and rapport with your audience faster.
I think that's super true. I was just on a sales call earlier today, and that guy was going to ask me the frequency question. And he's like, have you ever heard this guy, Ted McGrath? And I hadn't. He's like, he sends me like 3 emails a day. And I was like, well, what does he sell? And it's taking people through that, always zooming out and thinking holistically about the marketing goal and the buyer journey and like the true fundamentals. Like a lot of info guys, and when I say info, I mean people selling like BizOp, like a drop shipping program or kind of like a YouTube ad for kind of a not get rich quick scheme, but like a making money opportunity with Amazon FBA or Facebook, Faceless Instagram or one of those things. It's like those guys are emailing you every day because they're kind of just trying to rapidly take you through this buyer's journey. It's not like a high consideration sale. It's like you showed interest, and it's kind of a full send type mentality. Whereas like if you're selling accounting services, that's not like people aren't going to like YOLO into your accounting services. They're just going to like think about you as an accountant and then like consistently be frustrated over the series of months that like, damn, like I really don't know my numbers. And then they're going to reach that point of frustration. At the same time, they've been reading your newsletter, you're top of mind, you're authoritative, and that's when the sale happens.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot to that, because kind of the other way of looking at newsletter audiences and just like, and this is true again for like a lot of marketing channels, is like there's different levels and layers of intent. So let's say, so just to give you a hypothetical of like something we've started to implement for different B2B clients is, let's say you're sending a newsletter once or twice a week. Somebody clicks like a free consultation or book a call link, like a high intent link click, but then they don't actually take action. So they don't book that call. Then we'll trigger an automation that does start sending them emails every day, because we've received a signal from the audience that says they have a high intent. They wouldn't have clicked that link if they didn't think you could solve some problem for them, or they have something going on in their business where they think you could help. And so it's basically abandoned cart, but for B2B, right? It's like you gave us a really high quality, high intent. Yeah, exactly. You gave us a really high intent, high quality signal. We're going to be more aggressive with you. If you're not giving us those signals, we're going to be less aggressive with you. I think that's just a good way to think about the kind of the accordion of marketing in general. It's like if we showed you a Facebook ad and you didn't click on it, maybe you'll see another one in a couple weeks and we'll see if you bite when we show you that Facebook ad again. But if you click on that link and you come to our website, you're going to start seeing ads every day, right? Because you gave us a high intent signal. It's the same idea. What
have been some of the patterns of success for the B2B clients that you're working with, where success is measured by, very obviously attributable conversions? I think a lot of the time, that's one of the frustrating things about content in general is that mixed attribution. It's like, well, the reason that they were warm enough to go do this other thing, like just go to do a direct land, just type your website in by name and just book on the Calendly, is because of some argument that you made in the newsletter a few weeks ago that sat with them and kind of marinated until they one day were in the shower and like, damn, I really do need to do that. What have been the patterns of success? You mentioned earlier being on other channels, right? It's like, well, there's the 12 total touch points, but 5 of them were also from LinkedIn posts. So maybe being present on multiple platforms is success, but then that becomes an rejection if you bring that up at the same time. It's like, well, I don't have a podcast, I don't have any presence. Is email enough on its own? So I guess there's 2 questions there, but I think you're capable of whittling through them both.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to answer kind of the second question first, it's like, it is generally a functional concept that the more content that you have across more channels, the better all of your channels work, right? So if you're posting on LinkedIn every day and you send a newsletter once a week, you'll probably notice, hey, that's weird. We're getting more responses from our cold email outbound. And it's like, well, probably because that wasn't the first time that they've seen you or heard from you, right? And so like all of these channels ultimately do operate in a total ecosystem. And like B2B attribution is notoriously difficult. There's some platforms and different systems popping up that are kind of helping to solve that problem. But, and at the end of the day, like with newsletter clients, that is something that we're actively working on. Is like, obviously you've got basic UTM attribution. It's like, if they literally click the link in the email that we sent and they booked a call, we're like, okay, that came from the newsletter. That's pretty obvious. What's harder to measure is kind of the halo effect of, how many people got on a sales call with you this week and said like, oh yeah, I've also been reading your newsletter for 3 months. That happens all the time. And it's like, they may have booked through a cold email or from LinkedIn, or they might've just come straight to your website or Googled you and clicked on a PPC link. Like they might've done something else, but the newsletter is what warmed them up. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, like a lot of these with kind of how advanced is the attribution, how advanced does it need to be? Some of that just comes down to like, what budget does the business have to like invest in that level of intelligence? But also the reason why I think newsletters crush in B2B specifically is because the ROI is so ridiculous. It's like, we work with a lot of clients where their average contract value is like 50K to like 150K. And it's like, okay, you could literally pay us for a year and get one deal and it would justify the entire investment in the newsletter channel, right? And so that's where it's like, I just push a lot of B2B businesses to say like, hey, this is a great idea. You have your own audience. You also are collecting data about your audience that you can't get from other platforms. So if somebody clicks a call link on LinkedIn and then they don't book, like you don't have that data. If they do it on your newsletter, you do have that data and you can use that information to segment, do warm outreach, trigger automations, all that kind of stuff can come from your newsletter. And so, yeah, the ROI is so ridiculous in B2B that I'm like, yeah, this is a no brainer. Like you should totally have a newsletter, and it pretty much only has to work once for it to justify the investment.
I mean, I completely agree. It's really a matter of finding the clientele that's patient enough to have realistic expectations about like what you can do, how quickly.
Yep, totally agree. And I think that does, with some clients, they might, you go for 2 months, there's no lead flow. They're like, hey, why aren't we getting any leads? And it's like, there sometimes are answers for that. And sometimes it's like, well, you've only had 5 touch points and your audience is like 5K or 10K. And it's like, just leave the bun in the oven for a little bit longer, because newsletters are fundamentally, to your point earlier, like newsletters are fundamentally like a nurture channel. You can layer other things on top, right? You can layer on direct response and automations and all these other things, but it's fundamentally a nurture tool. And so, the amount of deal flow you can expect from like a cold email campaign or like LinkedIn DM outreach or like all these other options that you have, that might have an ROI time horizon of like 30 to 60 days. A newsletter has a longer ROI time horizon, but it also has more leverage, because somebody may need to be on your email list for 6 months before they trust you enough to close. And it's like, that's part of the nature of the kind of the B2B beast.
Speaking of audience and audience size, what are some of your opinions on like how you add initial people to your list? Because I think a lot of people have a CRM, especially on the B2B side. And it's like, okay, these people have gone cold. Maybe they responded to a cold email saying, yeah, sure, send me a sample, or sure, I'll hop on a demo. And then you never book the demo, and then you kind of let it go cold. And maybe you have a few hundred people like that in your list. Do you just add them to the newsletter? Like what are your takes on that? Or just start with fresh people, just throw everything against the wall, see what sticks? Doesn't matter. How do you approach that question for the business owner who's like, you're right, I should send a newsletter. am I really starting from zero, or do I actually have something to work with here?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, like there's a lot of questions that I'd have to ask to like really answer that for a brand. But like big picture, like the first question really is like, how cold is cold? Like, are we talking about like, yeah, I mean, you know, are we talking about someone who like signed up on your website 3 months ago? Yeah, they'd probably find a mail. Like they probably haven't completely forgotten about you, and they wouldn't be like opposed to getting a value added newsletter, right? But if it's like, this is a lead from 2 years ago and we're not even working in that vertical anymore, like, yeah, you probably shouldn't email them, right? So like that, it's kind of figuring out the answer to that question. And then the other like question really is like, how many leads are we talking about? If it's like 2,000 people, 5,000 people, something like that, it's like, yeah, you probably don't just want to come into that list full blast with like 2-year-old leads and like start sending newsletters. It's probably a bad idea. But if it's like 300 people, it's like, yeah, just rip it. And then if people aren't opening the emails, like just segment them out really quickly and you'll be totally fine. So there's like kind of a volume question and like an age and like, and also what level of engagement, like, did they book a sales call with you? Did they actually talk to you? Or is this someone who like filled out a random like lead gen page like a year ago and probably, yeah, they've definitely forgotten about you by now. So there's a lot of variables to take into account, but I would say, yeah, if it's sub 1,000 emails and they're not too old, you could probably just run that. And I mean, that might sound controversial to some people, but that's my personal opinion.
Yeah. And I think you said the important part, which is like, you know, take a hint, which is if they're, I don't know what that number, that perfect threshold is, but you know, I think HubSpot, for example, does a lot of automatic segmentation for you. That's like, hey, maybe you stop emailing this person. And I think it's like 8 consecutive emails without an open. So, okay. Yep. And then likewise, I always, as long as you're also doing best practices, like having an unsubscribe link that's not a maze to get to. And something we've done a couple times is just in that cold announcement email to a lot of the people that is just cold, just opening with a like, hey, this is brand new. You're added because you're in our system. If you're like not about it, just like click this button. Sorry for wasting 8 seconds.
Yep.
And like no one's going to reply and be like, how dare you waste my 8 seconds, versus the kind of like sneaking in and like sending the email like it's always been a thing, like welcome to issue number 16 of newsletter that's actually issue number 0, and acting like, yeah, we've just been friends forever. It's like, no, that's where you catch people off guard.
Agreed. Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And that's where it's like with that, giving them an easy opt out, like a really big, obvious one above the fold. That's a great way to go too. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk tactically here. You've given a few really good suggestions already, like the abandoned Calendly is a good one. What are some other more niche things that you're, if they're not too much secret sauce, that are some like low hanging fruit for someone with a list? They have a frequent send, like quick win.
Quick win. Well, there's an interesting one that we're exploring for our clients right now. So there's a identity resolution tool out there that just matches US contacts, but it's called RB2B. So it's just rb2b.com. And basically what it is,
it's wicked.
It's amazing. I have it on my website, and it's like a script you drop on your website, and if somebody comes to your site and they're able to match that back to a user, which I think the match rates on RB2B is like somewhere between like 10 and 30%. So if 1,000 people come to your website every month, it's like maybe 100 to 300 people will be matched. And then like the most basic implementation is just integrate that with a Slack channel. You'll get a message that says like, hey, this person just came to your website. Here's their LinkedIn. Here's their job title. Here's what company they work at. Here's their email address. And so like, that's a great way to do warm outreach, is just integrate that with Slack. If you see that come through and they look like they're in the right market for you, then shoot them a quick email and be like, hey, just saw you came by the website. You know, can I answer any questions for you? Just leave it pretty low key and warm, and see if they bite. And then but as a component of that, we're also basically figuring out for clients that have a little bit more site traffic, can we install this on their site, filter that down based on their ICP? And then basically it's like, if you come to the site, you're getting subscribed to the newsletter, which is like a US only, like CAN-SPAM compliant thing. You can't do this in other regions of the world. And that's something where we would need to, I would recommend, like, if you get a lot of traffic, I wouldn't recommend just ripping that, because it's one thing. It's like, if you have 10,000 newsletter subscribers and you might match like 300 users a month and you send once a week, let's just say hypothetically, then yeah, it's probably safe to just kind of like add those subscribers in, give them that easy opt out like you described. But that's a great way to nurture someone who came to your website, who's in market for you, who may not otherwise move down the funnel. But if it's like a situation where you have no newsletter, or you have like 1,000 subscribers and you have enough site traffic to match like 5,000 people, it's like, yeah, don't do that. That's just going to like that's going to turn your inboxing into like a complete dumpster fire. So there are some variables there to take into account, but that's just like one interesting kind of implementation that it's like for like a handful of clients, if we think they kind of meet the qualifications, we're like, actually, this is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think one of the keywords you said there's like is funnel. And the big thing about a newsletter for so many businesses is it is like a bolt-on funnel. So many businesses don't have a funnel. They're very like just catalog kind of brochure paradigm. Here's our website, book a call. And I say this knowing that like I am guilty of a lot of these things as well, because still early and a lot of our efforts go towards client work rather than like just immediate implementing every idea we can possibly think of for ourselves off out of the gates. But when you have a newsletter, you can literally just say like, we know something's going to happen to remind people we exist. So the first touch point can be less aggressive. Like the first offer to someone isn't like, hey, we don't know each other. Do you want to buy from me?
Yep.
Versus
that's what cold email is 99% of the time.
Yep.
And that's why you have to do such insane volume to get any results. It's like you have to email like 100,000 people to get like 10. I'm just throwing out hypotheticals. It's probably better than that. But like, because it's exactly that, it's like you're basically just creating this system where you're trying to get an email to inbox that just says like, hey, if you get in on a demo, I'll give you an Amazon gift card, like book a call. And it's like, we've never talked before. It's just like full on. And a newsletter that we view newsletters, and I'll let you finish your thought here in a second. Sorry to interrupt, but like newsletters are kind of like a really amazing intermediary where it's like, actually, we're going to give you something interesting or valuable. And then it's like, now you know who we are. Now we're starting to establish some rapport, and then we kind of work you from there.
It's, I come from a Bitcoin background. I don't even know what that means when I say it. I come from a Bitcoin background. So I was born and raised in the Bitcoin. It's like saying, I'm from the South or I'm from the North, but no, I worked in crypto the first year or two out of college. And there's a lot of like my lingo, I just forget, it's not mainstream concepts, but there's the idea of like time preference is a big Bitcoin concept, which is basically just saying like, are you patient and can you invest in things that have a slow payoff? But as a business has a higher time preference, and the whole like Bitcoin explanation is like, if you think that your currency is going to increase with value with time or hold its value, then you don't feel a need to spend all of your money immediately, because you're like, you're not like holding on to a melting ice cube. You're like, I can actually hold on to this because I don't need to make a purchase for 20 years and there's no reason, I don't lose anything but just waiting. Versus if your money is, losing value, then you just have to you're just like, I'm just going to go buy shoes and watches because like this money is going to be worthless tomorrow, so I might as well use it while I have it. So I think a lot of businesses, the equivalent of like, or not, I might have used the wrong word, but like high time preference or low time preference is the Bitcoin term. But when you become a higher or lower time preference business, meaning you're not thinking as much in short term, you're not chasing that next sale, the newsletter, I feel like, is just that most obvious way to move you towards like that longer time horizon. And there's been a lot of podcasts that talk about like European companies versus American companies. And since a lot of like European companies are kind of like entrenched in like family history, like LVMH and these brands have like legacy and these big things, like they're thinking in like decades long time horizons. So once you can break the paradigm of like, I just need the next sale, and you can think, so when you're in the paradigm of I just need the next sale, every person you meet is, can I sell this person right now? Because I just need my next sale. Versus you're thinking, how do we get the most amount of sales 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now? Every person you meet, you're just saying with like a useful offer. And then the newsletter just is the not no maintenance, but no cognitive maintenance, because you don't have to think, you just have a strategy, it runs on autopilot, and now you're cooking.
Agreed. Yeah, I mean, that's, I'm trying to remember the exact anecdote that like Alex Hormozy talks about, but it's something along the lines of like, it takes, whatever, like a tenth of the time to build like a 1-story building. And it's like, but if it's like, if you're laying the foundation for a 1-story building versus if you're laying the foundation for like a 100-story building, it's like your expectations and your pacing is like completely different. And so that's where it's like, and a lot of it just comes down to like working backwards from a target. So it's like, if you say, okay, in 12 months, I want this to be $1 million business. It's like, okay, great. How expensive is the thing that you sell? If it's $60, it's like you need a crap ton of customers really fast, right? If the thing that you sell is $3,000, it's like, okay, you just need to figure out how to get like 28 or 29 clients in the space of 12 months. It's like, that's not that crazy. And it's going to ramp. It's like, you want to engage in some strategies. The first 6 months might be, maybe you only get up to like 10 clients in 6 months, and then it starts to pick up because you're doing these longer term strategies that have more leverage. And I think the same is true for a lot of like, I operate a lot in this kind of performance marketing world where it's like, we put this money in, how much money did we get out? And then it's like, in what period of time, in like a, 1 month, 6 month, 12-month window. I think there's a lot to be said for like the performance marketing space. But by the same token, it's like kind of the alternative thought process to performance marketing is things like content, creative, and brand marketing, where it's like technically the highest leverage version of marketing is brand. And brand is also the most expensive and the longest thing to create, period. And so it's like, but if you're saying, I want to build a really powerful brand in like 5 years, and then it just comes down to like pacing the funds and figuring out like, how do you get the money to invest in the brand? And then like, how much are you investing? And like, how much does it take? That's really what it comes down to. And it's like, but if you're saying like, I don't really care, my business is called like getleadsnow.com and, I sell a $70 product. It's like, yeah, you should probably just be ripping some cold email, man. And like, and just refine that funnel until you get like 1,000 customers and then you're rocking. So it really depends.
Yeah, I think likewise for some of the niche B2B clients, they don't have like, I think this is always kind of a fallacy of like, every market's kind of infinite in size, but sometimes it isn't. Like if what you do, True. There's genuinely only like 10,000 decision makers in the country or 5,000. Like if what you sell is to university presidents or something, it's like how many, and it has to be schools with at least like 10,000 students to be worth your while. It's like, you can burn those pretty quick. Like you can burn through the market. Then so you got to rebrand and change your name. If everything is short-term thinking, like if it's just, we help new entrepreneurs get leads. It's like, yeah, there's a fresh batch printed every day, but having that longer time horizon, a shorter time preference attitude is really good. Let's do a few kind of rapid fire bonus questions here. What are some hot takes that you have about either email marketing or newsletters that are not consensus?
Not consensus. Well, I think one, and this applies a little bit more to e-commerce. I think one kind of like, I guess you could say like myth in my part is that like email marketing is just customer retention. And that I would say that's more true in e-com, but it's true in a lot of spaces where they say like, oh, like top of funnel is ads, middle of the funnel is the website, and then like bottom of the funnel is the point of sale. And then afterwards, like the thing after that hourglass is email. And it's like, actually, no, like email is an insanely powerful and affordable way to do top of funnel, middle funnel, and bottom of funnel. And so I think like one of the things that I encounter from time to time is basically kind of, how would you say, compartmentalizing channels into different stages of the funnel instead of thinking, how does each channel contribute differently to different stages of the funnel? That's a way more sophisticated and way more powerful way to think about email. So you say, how is email contributing to, and I think realistically, if you talk about something like e-commerce, email really starts, I would say, at the middle of the funnel. It's like somebody comes to the website, they opt in for an offer. It's like, well, now it's way cheaper than running a Facebook ad to send them emails to get them to their first purchase. That's customer acquisition from email, right? And the same is true in like B2B as well. It's like you're basically trading your most expensive channels, which tend to be advertising, and then you're using that to get contacts into your least expensive channel, which usually is email, right? And so you're taking most expensive because you get the broadest reach, funneling it into least expensive, and then turning that into generating sales. So that's just one kind of like thought process that I think sometimes I encounter. And then I would say like another myth is every contact that opens your email reads it. That's 100% not
That's
true.
something people want to believe.
Yes. And so it's like, if you wrote this like incredible 1,000 word essay, realistically, I would say like at least half of the openers that you're seeing in your ESP opened that email for like 5 seconds and then moved on. And so that's where it comes down to like, if your goal is content oriented, you have to treat that like that prime real estate, which is the above the fold on a mobile device. You treat that prime real estate essentially like an ad. But if the goal is like a newsletter, for example, the ad, which is that prime real estate, is I just need to hook the reader to scroll and keep reading. That's the goal. If it's like a promotion, it's like, okay, well then just like very clearly put, what are you selling? Like, what's the offer? And then give them that call to action right there. You don't have to scroll to click buy or whatever, right? So that's like, I would say that's another one. The other big one that I think I encounter more in B2B than in some other niches is that you can only email opt-ins. That's maybe my most hot take. And you know where I'm going with this, Louis. But like in the United States, CAN spam compliance is like super duper easy. Like CAN spam compliance is you have to have a business address and an unsubscribe link in your email. And as long as you're not like selling illegal things or doing something weird to acquire emails, like data dictionary attacks or like basically stealing data, as long as you're not doing that, like it's actually legal. The hard part, like where it gets complicated, is deliverability, which is like, so you can't just get emails however you want and then start mailing them, because Google, Yahoo, AOL, all the different ISPs will start blacklisting you, giving you low reputations. You'll land in spam all the time. It's counterproductive. So I don't go around just recommending to people like, oh yeah, get emails, shovel them into your list and email them. But the long story short, it's like from like a legal compliance perspective, it's not required. It's commonly preached as best practice to collect opt-ins, but that's only as a proxy for having good deliverability, because it's like if you get opt-ins, then that means you'll inbox well. But honestly, you could say like that's another myth, which is I see opt-in lists all the time where like they're still mailing contacts that haven't opened an email in 12 months. They opted in 2 years ago. And it's like, you should stop mailing that. That's still going to hurt your deliverability because, you know, they're not engaging. The ISPs are recording that. You're going to start landing in spam. Like the fact that it was an opt-in list, like isn't helping you right now. The problem is you had low engagement, or you're just constantly emailing someone who is not engaged, and the ISPs know that.
Well, I'm impressed. You know, like I've mentioned, I've done a lot of interviews, and there's some questions that the brain is primed to answer easily and some that aren't. And hot takes is one that's people are not usually like you have hot takes, but you don't say hot takes when they come to mind, right? It's difficult to retrieve. And you listed 4 really good ones right off the dome. So good work there. Couple comments really quickly. I love how you mentioned breaking arbitrary categories as just part of being a better marketer. And what you mentioned a bit ago in the previous question was kind of the whole brand marketing versus direct response marketing spectrum. And people are kind of make the same false equivocation where it's like, well, newsletters are brand marketing and ads are performance marketing, right? That's like an easy thing that a lot of people like nod along. Like, yes, that is correct. That is the truth. And even in this conversation, you're like, yes, and here's a signal within the brand marketing, right? That becomes a trigger for a direct response, a performance marketing action, which is like someone's done this thing and now we're going to use that as intent data to go and do this like super high intent action. So those categories are arbitrary and they just limit your creativity to like use things well. And I love the other point there that was really good is kind of this matrix of, you know, your most expensive leads are getting into your least expensive channel to like follow up with, and you're not doing anything with it. And on the B2B side, sometimes the cost of acquiring a lead is like you literally going out on a weeknight to some boring networking event and meeting with someone and like, you know, I don't mean to be so cynical here, but like having a painful conversation with someone because it's like they're part of your ICP. So like that's what you have to do. And like you or a rep as a founder or someone on your team just like drove in their car to go to an event and meet a person. And it's like, and that person you're just going to do nothing with. Like that's an expensive lead as well at a conference that you flew to a city for. And the newsletter becomes the least expensive way to like, hey man, we should keep in touch. Okay, great. Well, what does that mean? The newsletter is keeping in touch. And there's a value to that as well. So I love that contrast and the phrasing there. So lots of good points, Mr. Ben. Anything?
I'll give
go
you
for it.
A quick idea based on that one, which this is something Beehive does really well, but it's easy to do this for yourself too. So like when you reach a certain level in Beehive, they give you these VIP cards, and it's an NFC card with a QR code on the back. And so if you're at an event and you're talking to somebody and they're the right fit for your audience, you literally just whip something like this out and be like, oh, you should subscribe to my newsletter. I talk about XYZ all the time. And anyway, it's easy. This is just the one that Beehive will send you from, like, I don't actually even know what the qualification is, but sometimes they'll send you a box with this in it. But it's really easy just to put like a QR code
Check
or
your
an NFC.
mailboxes.
yeah, on like your business card or whatever, and just be like, oh yeah, scan this code, like, and then in like now you've flown to New York and you can nurture them. It's a good way to go.
Exactly, and even on like from a networking perspective, virtually too, same thing. Like sometimes you end like a networking call and there's just like, well, if I see anything, I'll let you know, and then you've never thought about the person ever again, and then you're just like, well, you can join this newsletter that's really interesting. Like, yeah, that sounds good. And then when you do actually come to that person with a favor, it's like, yeah, at least even if you didn't do any one-on-one effort, they've still seen your name, and it's been like kind of parasocial. So lots of great value here. Ben, who should be looking up forward? Lots of people should. Who should be looking you up? What should they be doing? Any other plugs, any other shout outs? You're putting a lot of content on Twitter. You've got a lot of newsletters. I'll let the people know. Come for more stuff.
I mean, basically the short version here is, if you don't have a newsletter, you should talk to Lewis, because Lewis can start your newsletter and start making content. And then if you have a newsletter and you want it to grow really fast with the exact right people, then you should go to forwardnewsletters.com and hit me up on there, book a call, and we'll see if you're a good fit. But realistically, like, as long as you're building like a big publisher audience, like you have a media brand, or especially if like you're B2B, high ticket B2B, you're looking to get into the newsletter game, just forwardnewsletters.com is the best place to go. And then, I'm very active on like LinkedIn and Twitter. You can just put in Ben Billups, I'll pop right up. So
yeah, I think you strike a good balance of shit posting and value posts. So
I only do that on Twitter. I keep that
on Twitter.
When I try to do it on LinkedIn, I never get a good reaction to it. And I was like, okay, I think it's just not the place.
It's not the place, but this is a whole nother conversation. We'll finish this. But, I think in general, people, like, this is something Alex Hormozy talks about all the time. I think about all the time, is like drawing false conclusions because of the data that's visible versus what's invisible. So like Twitter made likes private. LinkedIn has not. So like, are people going to like your shit post? Like, people might be amused by it and like, I like this guy, but they're not going to be like, I like this guy, and like comment on something because of like the weird social effects. But like, maybe that's building all like this, these silent fans. But at the same time, my advice isn't to go be a clown on LinkedIn. I just personally have too much fun sometimes not to.
Maybe after I sell my business, that's what I'll do. I'll just throw it all away on LinkedIn.
Hey, it's the worst ways to go out with a bang.
Exactly.
On that note, going out with a bang. Ben, thank you again for all the ideas here. Lots of tactical stuff, lots of mindset stuff, and appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Lewis.